Well, this research flies in the face of so much of the lifespan extension type stuff we've seen out there. It is a game changer in terms of the perspective that it gives us, because people fight all the time over high protein versus low protein. They even fight over caloric restriction versus not restricting calories. But not too often do you see people talking about which kinds of fats potentially extend lifespan. You might see people demonizing certain fats, saying that one's gonna clog your arteries and do that, and that one's gonna do this and that. But we never see it actually associated with extending or not extending lifespan. So boy, are you gonna enjoy this study. And we'll take some stuff out of it and put it into practice so that it works. After today's video, I put a link down below for 25% off of Seed. They are today's video sponsor. Has nothing to do with the content itself. I just want to be able to share good products with you. So 25% off what is called a synbiotic. It is a prebiotic and a probiotic in one. So it's a capsule inside of a capsule. Now, when I take this stuff, I feel it almost immediately. Okay, I was recently dealing with a parasite from a foodborne illness, and it was gnarly. And Seed helped get me out of that. Now, that's my own anecdotal experience, but it's the only probiotic that I use and the only probiotic I recommend, and that is the truth. No exaggeration. So that is a 25% off discount link for you to try Seed's Daily Synbiotic. Most people that take it feel it within a couple of days, but it's really important if you're overall just changing your diet and you all of a sudden have new foods coming in and you're doing something different, helps your microbiome potentially adapt to that a little bit better. So again, that link is in the top line of the description underneath this video. So before I unpack this study, we have to address sort of saturated fat and that whole thing for a second. Unfortunately, people look at red meat and they demonize it because in a lot of the studies, red meat gets roped in to processed meat. A lot of times they say, oh, well, people are consuming XYZ and this, and they're purely addressing processed meat, but because it's a processed red meat takes the fall for it. Whereas like a wholesome red meat is a perfectly natural thing. You look at the blue zones, they still eat nice, moderate amounts of wholesome red meat that is rich in nutrients, but that's beside the point. This study was published in the Journals of Gerontology, and full disclaimer, it's a rodent model study, but we have to start somewhere. Fascinating. They divided mice into 4 groups. Group 1 was in a 5% caloric deficit, so moderate deficit. The 3 other groups were in a 40% caloric deficit, so 40%, serious caloric deficit. One group consumed soybean oil as their predominant fat source. Another group consumed fish oil as their predominant fat source. And the other group consumed lard as their predominant fat source. And I bet you know what the answer is going to be. You're thinking fish oil. Fish oil is healthy. It's omega-3s. Wrong. Here's what's up. The 40% caloric restriction groups all had extended lifespan compared to the 5% group. So we know in this case, caloric restriction was working. But the lard group had the longest lifespan. And lard is made up of not just saturated fat, it's saturated fat and monounsaturated fat. And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that you need to load up lard. That would be irresponsible, because there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that in a caloric surplus or in overnutrition, saturated fat is very problematic too. But if you're responsibly eating in a caloric deficit, you're probably absolved of some of those risks, okay? Because you're such a deficit, just like we saw in this study, a 40% deficit. Now, there is some debate out there, and it's hot and it's ugly debate, to be honest, that says that longevity is really related to the level of saturation or unsaturation in your body. So I've seen people come after Rhonda Patrick for this, because Rhonda Patrick is very pro fish oil, and I am very pro fish oil. But Rhonda is also very pro like moderate amounts of meat consumption too, right? So I've seen people come at her for this because they're claiming that high amounts of polyunsaturated fat or fish oils are actually bad for longevity. But no one here is really saying only get omega-3s as your oil source, as your fat source. Like that would be foolish. We need saturated fat. We also need monounsaturated fats. And the thing with a monounsaturated fat is that it's almost saturated. It's almost there. It only has one unsaturated bond. So it's almost a saturated fat. So if life really is, even based upon this theory about levels of unsaturation, monounsaturated fats like olive oil and avocado oil and macadamia nuts, that would pretty much get you there too in a healthy way. The reason that I mention this is it allows us to paint a picture. Caloric restriction grants us a lot of slack no matter what kind of diet we're doing. But when we look back at that nature study, I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on it, that looked at monkeys, basically found that caloric restriction only mattered for longevity if the diet was not that good. If the diet was wholesome and nutritious, caloric restriction didn't really matter. My suggestion to you here is that if you're someone that's open to it, consuming high amounts of fruit, high amounts of vegetables, and moderate to high amounts of lean protein that still has a decent amount of saturated fat and has a decent amount of monounsaturated fats. Some meats are going to have polyunsaturated fats, and a small amount is fine. But you're not expected to get 100% of your daily fat intake from polyunsaturated fats. And mega dosing fish oil to an extreme degree, like 20 plus grams a day, is probably not good. What we see here is that a more stable fat, something that is a monounsaturated or a saturated, is probably why it was so good. It was stable, less risk of oxidation. Polyunsaturated fats aren't bad at all. But if you leave some open cut up fish on a counter, it's going to go rancid in hours and it's going to oxidize those fats. Monounsaturated fats, olive oil, avocado oil, macadamia nut oil, and saturated fats, tallow, lard, cheese, things like that, they're stable. They are very hard to oxidize compared to polyunsaturated fats, which means they're harder to oxidize in your body. And antioxidants seem to be one of the most powerful things to combat oxidative stress. So if the antioxidants that you are consuming are having to work so hard just to offset oxidized fats you're consuming, you're not getting the benefit of those antioxidants for longevity because they're tied up having to clean up the mess that the crappy food made. So focus on stable oils. And I don't care if you go saturated fat or not. You should probably try to keep your saturated fat intake to 25% of your fat calories and get most of it from monounsaturated fats and about 15% or so from polyunsaturated fats like fish oil and fresh nuts that have not oxidized. As always, keep it locked in here on my channel. See you tomorrow.